question is, can food be used as a forum for cultural sharing? I wanted to explore this idea with the view to using it as a setting for a workshop for international students. It's been evidenced that there is an integration issue, and students do feel a little bit isolated, and I felt that I could use food as a good way of breaking down the barriers to try and give some cultural validation and also develop a sense of community and build a community through it as well. So the journey for my research started with my Mirror Mirror project in year 1. The project required us to look inwards at ourselves and produce an artefact that reflected us. So I produced a branch and it had 3 webs built on it. These webs represented the 3 different cultures that I have lived with through my life. I also live in London and have lived here for the majority of my life. Travelling on the tube, I love the diversity. And when I'm in a crowded tube and I look around and I see people from all over the world, I just want to know their stories. So when I started this course, I didn't plan to do this, but I found that actually I could combine all my different interests and form a research question that excited me. And that was food, culture and storytelling. Food because it's been part of my life since the age of 9. At the age of 9 I started to be taught how to cook. Within my culture we are expected to be good wives, so that training started. I found that around the table, around food, the barriers break down. So I'm hearing stories from people sharing whilst cooking in the kitchen, to say the late hours in a dinner party when all the barriers are broken down, and a lot of sharing goes on there. So that's what I really want to capture within a workshop. I want to provide the forum, which would be food, and draw out those stories and create an artefact or something that can be taken away, but more importantly is the cultural validation. So I started off by doing some interventions to establish if my instinct was right. That being the barriers are broken down around food and spice, allowing people to contribute to cultural sharing. So I did several interventions and through that gained a lot of stories, a lot of sharing. It seemed to attract people of that interest, and they all had stories to tell, and I've collated those stories, and there seems to be a thread of past memoirs. So that's really what I'm going to try and draw on, is the memoirs, and build those stories from there. My next step was to establish who my research would benefit and also who could assist me. So I started looking into possible stakeholders and approached the Language Centre, as I know they already hold workshops, and not having held workshops myself before, I felt like I needed some guidance. So I went along and I actually met with Maya Wilhelm. She came up with a very interesting point, and that was that in different cultures there are different levels of sharing, and that may be a challenge within my workshop. That for instance, in Western culture we're taught to share and it's okay, but in some cultures from the young are expected to not share so much. And I guess that instills itself and carries through, and maybe it could be a barrier that could be overcome through the workshop. The other area that I thought would be of interest, another stakeholder, would be the academic support workshops. I spent a lot of time visiting and taking part in those workshops and learnt a lot from them. But the one in particular that really stood out to me was the identity through textiles. And that was done by Suki Sagu Reddy. And so I approached her, and we are now collaborating on setting up a workshop using my idea, and she's helping me go through the process of knowing, how I should include it, and just kind of giving me feedback, and then obviously and set up a session as well. However, that was meant to have happened, but coronavirus happened. So that's changed my direction in my project. Initially I felt a bit deflated. What will I do? My project is about sharing, and it's about culture, and mostly the sharing through being in the same environment. However, after a week or so, I started to see things happen. Digitally, a lot of sharing was going on. Through my kids, I saw TikToks and different websites coming up, party sites and so on. And more importantly, what else can you do when you're locked down in a home? There's very few things you can do, and cooking and food is one of them. And so I saw a lot of sharing starting to go on, images, recipes, so much. So I thought, great, I can embrace this. And so I did. I drew up a monkey survey and sent that out to try and get some feedback and get some data as well on what people are using, why they use it, are they still using traditional learnings from books for recipes, where do they get their recipes from, the cultural side of it as well, the fusion of the different cultures, and so on. And I received a lot of data back. Off the back of that, I've realised that maybe that's the way forward in my next interventions. So I'm putting together a digital workshop. So that's my next step.